The Zarentine's plasma blast tore through Brian's shoulder and sent him smashing to the rubble. Yet the grizzled human mercenary just snarled and wrenched himself back up to keep fighting. This display of unkillable human tenacity made Commander Fenris's scales crawl. Plasma bolts sizzled overhead, filling the air with the acrid stench of molten stone, as Brian crouched behind a low wall amidst the war-torn ruins of Zorthak. The unstoppable blue-scaled lizard warriors pushed forward, hungry for blood as they fanned out to flank his position. Brian's armor creaked as he checked his rifle's charge, a critical 10% remaining. His calloused fingers found the creased photo in his chest pocket, a tangible memory. Ellie, his baby girl, her smiling face, captured on rare paper. He pressed his cracked lips to it before tucking it safely away. "For you, kiddo," Brian whispered. "Daddy needs this cred." His wife was dead, killed in a space elevator crash. Now it was Brian's job to provide for Ellie back on Earth, no matter how many alien scumbags he had to waste. Brian spun from cover, cracking off 2 shots. The superheated bolts lanced across the short distance, blowing steaming, fist-sized holes in the Zarentine line, sprays of sticky blue blood, shrill screams of agony. He ducked back as the aliens unleashed a hellstorm of return fire. Plasma scorched the rubble around him, heating his armored skin. A bolt hit home, drilling into Brian's shoulder and spinning him like a toy. He crashed to the debris-covered ground, vision swimming in a red haze of pain. Fresh blood gushed over his fingers as he clamped a shaking hand to the wound. How much blood had he already lost today? Too much, but not enough to stop him. Commander Fenris grinned a mouthful of needle fangs as he gestured his troops closer. "The human is down," he shouted, urging them forward with a clawed hand. "Quickly, before it recovers." The overeager Zarentine rushed from cover, bounding towards Brian's position with savage battle cries. They didn't know just how unkillable humans really were. Brian rolled to his back with a pained grunt, fumbling a cluster of finger-sized metal micro-grenades from his belt. He hurled the explosives into the alien mob as they closed in, spacing them to maximize carnage. The grenades detonated in a rippling series of crackling blasts, ripping charging Zarentine apart at the molecular level. Torn limbs, torsos, and heads rained down as the aliens' front ranks simply ceased to exist. Gory blue splatters coated the survivors as they scrambled desperately back for cover. Brian hauled himself upright, panting through gritted teeth. His shaking fingers found a slender metal shard embedded in his shoulder and yanked it free with a sickening, sucking sound. He slapped a patch of self-sealing spray skin over the gushing wound. 5% charge left, not good. Brian snarled at the remaining aliens, crouched in their shattered barricades. If these scaly fucks wanted to collect his head, he'd make damn sure they paid for it in blood. "It's all right, you bastards," he growled, readying his rifle. "Come and get me." Brian slipped back into the shadows of the ruins, mapping out firing positions. He'd lure these dumb lizards into a killing ground of interlocking fields of fire. Make them come to him. It was the only way. He had to win. Had to survive this hellish rock for Ellie. She was waiting for him, and Brian sure as shit wasn't going to disappoint his little girl. No matter how many aliens he had to kill to get back home to her. Commander Fenris ducked behind the smoldering wreckage of a hover tank, plasma bolts sizzling overhead. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Zaxtor, crouched beside him, hissing through clenched teeth. "Commander, we have the humans surrounded, but it's picking us off piecemeal. We've already lost a third of our platoon." Zaxtor's eyes darted frantically, trying to track Brian's movements in the ruins. Fenris slammed a fist against the tank's scorched hull, growling in frustration. "This is insanity. It's one badly wounded human. We have it outgunned and outnumbered 20-1. The commander's mind raced back to the mission briefing before they'd landed on this war-torn hellhole. The intelligence reports had described humanity as a minor footnote in the galactic community, a small backwater species that had only recently achieved interstellar travel using primitive, slower-than-light ion drives. High Command had scoffed at the notion that a single human mercenary aiding the Zorthak rebels could pose any real threat. They'd ordered Fenris to deal with this minor nuisance quickly and efficiently. Snapping back to the nightmarish present, Fenris cursed under his breath. He'd grossly underestimated this human, this Brian Collins. The man fought like a cornered animal, with a savage ferocity the likes of which Fenris had never seen. And he was smart, too, luring the Zarantine into ambushes, setting traps amongst the rubble, fighting dirty. Keying his comlink, Fenris barked orders to his beleaguered troops. "All units move in and converge on that human's position. Watch each other's backs and check your corners. Move." The Zarantine squads advanced cautiously, leapfrogging from cover to cover. Suddenly, a handful of troopers hit tripwires cleverly hidden in the rubble. Bursts of razor-sharp shrapnel shredded the closest aliens, spraying the ruins with glistening blue gore. The rest dove for cover, screaming in terror and pain. Brian's mocking voice rang out from somewhere in the twisting labyrinth of ruins. "You lizards aren't as dumb as you look. I was worried this would be too easy." Fenris snarled, eyes narrowing as he realized the human was toying with them, playing with his soldiers like a cat tormenting wounded mice. A blood-curdling alien scream pierced the smoky air. Fenris whipped around to see one of his troopers yanked off his feet, dragged kicking and flailing into a darkened doorway. Plasma fire flashed from within, painting the crumbling walls with strobing blue light. The soldiers' dying screams cut off abruptly with a wet, meaty crunch. Fenris and Zaxtor exchanged a look of growing unease, the lieutenant's scales paling to a sickly teal. It was clear now, beyond any shadow of doubt, this Brian Collins was no ordinary human, and the Zarantine squad was in for the fight of their lives. Zaxtor gripped his plasma rifle tighter, swallowing hard. Fenris steeled himself, mandibles clenched in grim determination as he prepared to lead his troops into the deadly maze of ruins, to hunt down this human, or die trying. Fenris and his battered squad regrouped in the smoking ruins, hastily tending to their wounded. The respite proved short-lived. Zaxtor growled, "The humans trail, Commander. It's getting away." Brian's blood made a crimson path, splattering the rubble as he slipped through the twisting alleys. His shoulder burned, a river of hot agony. Each step sent a fresh jolt of pain lancing down his arm, but he pushed on. An abandoned workshop loomed ahead. Brian staggered inside, plasma rifle clutched in slick, bloody hands. His eyes lit on an old metalworking plasma forge tucked in the shadows. A crazy idea flashed through his mind. Fingers worked in a frantic blur, scavenging scraps and parts. Wires were spliced, metal welded, components jury-rigged with desperate haste. Fenris stalked into the workshop minutes later, Zaxtor and a dozen battered Zarantine at his back. Plasma rifles scanned the room, alert for any trace of their quarry. Zaxtor spotted a bloody smear on a workbench. "Commander, look!" A blinding flurry of plasma bolts ripped from the shadows, tearing into the shocked aliens. Energy shields popped and sizzled, barely absorbing the onslaught. Fenris dove behind a shelving unit as searing plasma blasts ripped past his skull. "Rotasi!" Brian burst from cover, a hulking backpack-mounted plasma cannon in his hands. Jury-rigged from the forge, it hissed and crackled with barely contained energy. The human skin gleamed with feverish sweat, but his eyes blazed like twin stars. Plasma bolts hammered the aliens, burning through armor and flesh. Zaxtor went down screaming, his torso a smoking ruin. Fenris rolled away as the human's cannon raked his cover, slag raining down. "It's unstoppable," a Zarantine soldier wailed over the calm, voice thick with terror. Fall back, The transmission cut to static. Fenris could only watch in numb disbelief as Brian scythed through his platoon. Soldiers twitched and burned, blown apart by the human's fury. Ozone and charred meat choked the air. And then silence. Fenris' hands shook as he peeked from cover. His elites lay strewn in twitching, smoking ruin. Only the human still stood, battered and bloody, but eyes bright with deadly purpose. Brian advanced, cannon humming as he leveled it at Fenris's chest. The commander scrabbled back, hand clawing for his sidearm, too slow, Brian loomed over him, face a blood-streaked mask, finger tightening on the trigger. "What are you?" Fenris croaked, mind reeling. "This couldn't be happening. Impossible." The human's eyes, cold and hard as vacuum, bored into his. "I'm a human, you son of a bitch, and I'm here to make you pay for what you've done." Fenris's words hit Brian like a plasma bolt to the gut, driving the air from his lungs. His finger tightened on the cannon's trigger, the rage boiling up inside him, screaming to paint the walls with this alien's brains. "What did you say?" Brian snarled, his voice low and deadly. The Zarantine commander swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the cannon. "Your daughter, Ellie, she's not on Earth anymore. We took her." Brian surged forward, a roar of pure fury ripping from his throat. His free hand shot out, clamping around Fenris's neck, as he slammed the alien against the wall hard enough to crack the stone. "You did what?" Fenris choked and sputtered as Brian shook him like a rag doll, the human's face twisted with rage. "The Zarantine," Fenris gasped out. "We needed leverage over the humans. We took her from your world." Brian's mind reeled, his grip on Fenris's throat slackening. This couldn't be real. It had to be a trick, some desperate ploy by this alien scum to save his own skin. But then he remembered the last transmission from Earth, just before he'd shipped out to Zorthak. The way Ellie's smiling face had dissolved into static, the connection cutting out abruptly. At the time, he'd assumed it was just a communications glitch. Fenris, seeing the shock and doubt flickering across Brian's face, pressed his advantage. "She's alive, I swear it. If you spare me, I'll take you to her. Torture me, kill me, and you'll never find her." The alien's words tumbled out in a desperate rush. "Zaxtor, Crux, and Gorlak, they're the ones who abducted her, not me." Brian stepped back, his jaw clenched so tight he could feel his teeth creaking. Every instinct screamed at him to pull the trigger, to watch this bastard's head pop like a ripe melon. But then Ellie's face flashed through his mind, her bright eyes and gap-toothed smile. If there was even a chance Fenris was telling the truth. With a growl of frustration, Brian lowered the cannon slightly. "All right, lizard," he gritted out, "you get to live for now. But if you're lying to me, I will make you suffer in ways your tiny reptile brain can't even imagine." Fenris nodded vigorously, relief washing over his scaly features. Brian gestured with the cannon. "On your feet. You're going to tell me everything you know about my daughter and the bastards who took her, and then—" His eyes glinted with a promise of violence. "Then we're going to pay your friends a little visit and get my girl back, and God help anyone who stands in my way." Brian stormed through the Zarantine base in a whirlwind of violence, Fenris at his heels. His jury-rigged plasma cannon spat star-hot death with each pull of the trigger, alien bodies crumpling into smoking heaps of charred flesh. Alarms shrieked through sterile metal corridors as Brian charged ahead, unstoppable, shrugging off the plasma bolts that sizzled against his armor. Fenris shouted directions over the chaos. "Left! The detention block is left!" A blast door exploded inward as Brian's cannon roared, and then they were inside. His heart leapt to his throat when he saw Ellie strapped to that cold metal slab, pale and unmoving. "Ellie! Daddy's here, baby! I'm here!" He rushed forward, but faltered as he saw the hideous sight before him. Ellie's blonde hair had been shaved away, her scalp studded with metal plugs and wires that snaked to a nightmarish machine hulking in the corner. Her skin had a terrible pallor, like a corpse. Fenris recoiled, eyes wide. "By the goddess, I didn't know. They've been experimenting on her." Brian spun on him with a murderous snarl building in his throat, but the sound of a plasma rifle's charge cycle stopped him cold. Zaxtor and his lackeys stood in the doorway, weapons leveled. The alien's lipless mouth split in a cruel sneer as he hissed, "Impressive, human. You exceeded our expectations. But did you really think we'd let you and the traitor leave alive?" Brian pivoted without hesitation, placing himself between Ellie and the bastards who'd butchered her. His cannon hummed eagerly as it drank in power from its cobbled-together reactor. Fenris moved like a striking serpent, catching them all off guard as he lunged for Zaxtor with a wordless battle cry. The two aliens crashed to the floor in a tangle of thrashing limbs and flashing blades. Brian didn't waste the opening. His cannon pulsed like a beating heart, and Crux and Gorlak simply vanished, transmuted into sprays of component atoms and drifting clouds of sizzling plasma. Zaxtor reared back, leveling his rifle. A single shot drilled through Fenris's heart, sending the turncoat Zarantine crashing to the deck in a fountain of cobalt blood. But it was the last thing Zaxtor ever did. Brian's cannon roared one final time, and Zaxtor's head popped like a rotten melon. In the sudden silence, Brian rushed to Ellie's side, frantically tearing away the wires and tubes violating his baby girl. "Ellie, it's okay, honey. I'm here. We're leaving this place." But Ellie's eyes stayed closed, her body limp in his arms. He shook her, screamed her name until his throat burned raw, but she didn't respond. The horrible truth crashed over Brian like a frigid tsunami. The experiments, the torture, it had been too much. Ellie was gone. A soundless scream ripped from Brian's throat as he clutched Ellie's lifeless body to his chest, his entire world crashing down around him. Alarms shrieked in the hallways beyond, the entire base mobilizing to deal with the threat. He'd have to fight his way out alone now. And in that moment, Brian almost welcomed the idea of falling under the aliens' guns, of joining his baby girl in whatever came after. But then, white-hot rage ignited in his core, burning away the anguish like a purifying flame. No, he wouldn't let it end here. Not until he'd made the Zarantine pay for what they'd done. All of them. Brian pressed his lips to Ellie's cold forehead, whispering past the lump in his throat, "I'll make this right, baby girl, I promise you that." Gently, so gently, he laid her back down. His hands no longer shook as he took up his cannon, the way to cold comfort now. He turned to the door, a glacier-slow rage settling over his thoughts like a shroud of ice. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Zarantine had sown the wind. Now they would reap the whirlwind. And Brian would be the one to bring the storm down on their heads. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.